Hello, my name is S.K. Williams, and what a difference a day makes. My channel exists mostly as a personal channel where I can put out anything that I like. I do a lot of religious content simply because that is what I like to study, not because it is a religious channel. I don't talk, however, much about politics because, while I have my own political views, I don't find spending a good deal of time rehashing commentary that others have done on the topic to be particularly interesting to me, especially since my political views, while they may contribute something new to people who aren't accustomed to such thinking, and are certainly outside of what you normally hear on the right-left dynamic in the modern world, especially in the United States of America, where I live, are also so out of bounds of what is normally acceptable in the United States of America, that my political opinion would at best be a curiosity, if not outright rejected by people in the United States. However, I do enjoy talking about history, because when we discuss history, we're discussing the events and how they shaped our society, and not simply my personal opinion. For example, if a war happened, and I personally think that the war should never have happened, and that it was a waste of time, money, resources, and lives, that would not change the fact that the war happened, or the effects that the war had on world culture. So discussing historical events always has a bit of an edifying factor without necessarily engaging in personal political theory. Which isn't to say you can't interject your own views onto such things, but still, there's a bit more freedom to simply discuss the facts. And that is what I'm going to discuss in this video, because over the weekend, President Joseph Biden of the United States of America has decided to step down from his campaign and not seek re-election, relinquishing his party's nomination, giving it to his running mate, Kamala Harris, to whom he has endorsed and given his full support to, and pledged all of his campaign finances and resources to as well. And he has urged other Democrats to support Kamala Harris as well. Some are seeing this as a brave step showing leadership and how selfless Joe Biden is, whilst others are using it as an example of him being selfish because he had to be talked into it and basically coerced into it. One thing is for certain, though. For several months, we have been talking about the cognitive decline of Joe Biden. So much so that the White House had to say that videos of Joe Biden acting off, as if he was confused or dazed or didn't know what he was doing or saying, were all cheap fakes. Not even deep fakes where they create the video artificially or superimpose a face on another, but cheap fakes where they take real video and simply rely on clever editing to make him look stupid and confused. But that Joe Biden was still mentally sharp and capable. But then he debated Donald Trump, and his performance was very poor, convincing people that there was something wrong, and he gave an interview afterward dismissing it as simply having a bad night, and him being tired, and him being overworked, and him drilling too much. But it was just a bad night. However, in that interview he came off as confused and struggled to find words. And he gave a press conference to prove he was mentally competent, and at this point, it was obvious he was not. And the discussion, not simply on the right, but also on the left, became about his cognitive decline. People simply lost confidence that Joe Biden could be an effective president of the United States of America. Then the great shift happened. Someone attempted to end the life of Donald Trump. And while we still don't know the exact motives of the would-be assassin, whose name, of course, is now infamous, Thomas Matthew Crooks, we do know that the way Trump behaved, standing defiantly, fist in the air, saying, "Fight, fight, fight," with an American flag behind him, was seen as a heroic, patriotic moment, inspiring others, even to the point of cheering and chanting, "USA, USA, USA," as he left, alive, bloodied but unbeaten. The media has for 9 years detested Donald Trump. They have called him an authoritarian dictator and an existential threat to democracy, and have, of course, said that the election between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, the second election between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, is an election choice between freedom and fascism, between liberty and authoritarianism, between democracy and dictatorship. Donald Trump is presented as an existential threat to democracy, compared to Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Germania. Names, of course, that I am botching intentionally due to our kindly host. And for those watching on another platform, with apologies, but I only made one of these instead of two. I have several videos to make, and I can't make a dedicated video for both platforms. But the point is, in the face of increasing public uncertainty over his cognitive decline, and increasing popularity of Donald Trump, especially after the assassination attempt, which in contrast makes Joe Biden look very feeble indeed. There simply was no way forward for him in this campaign, especially since he has not been a spectacular president, or even one generating controversy in which people hotly debated whether his policies were good or not. Certainly there were some people who believed he was doing an okay job, but no one believed he was doing a stellar or fantastic job, except perhaps Sessions, but he seems to be rather delusionally attached to the Democrat Party, to such a degree that they can do no wrong. He is exactly what the media depicts a typical Trump supporter to be like, only for Biden and for the Democrats. Sessions even claimed that Biden won the debates, which is bizarre, because for a very long time, the White House had been saying that Joe Biden is not suffering cognitive decline, and that people showing videos of him looking confused or blank-faced, like he wasn't there, or the lights were on but no one was home, as they say, or stumbling or wandering off. Well, those were cheap fakes, not even deep fakes, where they swap the face using computers or digitally create an entire new video, but rather cheap fakes, where all they did was take real video and through clever editing made him look incompetent when he really wasn't. But then he debated Donald Trump, and it was obvious that his decline was there. And in the interview he gave to prove he wasn't declining, he looked like he was declining. And in the press conference to show how sharp he was, when he was holding a summit at NATO. And don't get me wrong, I think some of it is unfair. Like when he said, when he was introducing, and I'm not quoting this word for word, but when he was introducing someone and said, and now President Putin, I mean Zelensky, people grabbed onto that saying he couldn't even tell them apart. I will be fair to Biden. I myself have misspoken and used wrong names from time to time. And in the NATO event when he spoke, I don't think him saying Putin instead of Zelensky is proof of cognitive decline, simply because we all make such mistakes. At the same time, there are too many errors in too many other instances for Joe Biden, and what matters is the public perspective in an election. Joe Biden had previously pledged to stay in the election. He was going to stay the course. He was going to remain in no matter what. He would never step down. And now he has stepped down. And some are seeing this as a selfless act, proving what a good leader he was, what a good leader he is, placing the American people above his own political will or his own ambitions. Others, on the other hand, see it as the move of a narcissist, knowing he would lose, or point out the fact that he had to be coerced into relinquishing his nomination as the Democrat candidate, saying that others had to effectively talk him into it over a long period of time, that he is not selfless at all. But whichever may be the case, or perhaps it is a combination of the two, it is irrelevant. For what is relevant is that he steps down, that Kamala Harris, his running mate for vice president, has been made the nominee, and she has been given an inheritance of all of his campaign donations and his campaign staff, though some may leave, others may come, but she has this electoral machine in place. But she wasn't running for president, and even though she was vice president with Biden for 4 years, and running with Biden in his campaign, the simple truth is, she did not campaign for president, and no one was supporting her for president. And as unpopular as Biden is right now, Harris is even less so. Although she may, in an odd perversion of what we would normally see, secure more votes than Joe Biden, simply because, popular or not, many think it is time for him to step down due to his age and his cognitive decline. And do keep in mind, it is not just his age. Donald Trump is also rather old, and people like to point that out. But Donald Trump seems to be mentally sharp and fit, while Joe Biden does not. And ultimately, it wouldn't even matter if Joe Biden was 35. If he was into cognitive decline, he should not be president of the United States of America. That is simply the reality. However, it seems this year has been a perfect storm, eliminating the Democrats. For 4 years, Joe Biden has been president, and his tenure in office has not sparked any great victories that people on the left and people who vote Democrat would rally behind. Joe Biden has not been a successful president in capturing the public imagination, inspiring people as a leader, and he certainly can't stand by his policies and records, since even people who agree with his decisions still nevertheless see them as a matter-of-course decision rather than something inspirational or great. Joe Biden never did anything truly great to capture people's imaginations, whilst Donald Trump, who has been president before, did. Though the people who would vote for Biden may think what he did was awful, he nevertheless inspired people and captured their loyalty by doing things that they approved of within his electoral base. And even some who voted Democrat switched to Donald Trump even before the issue of Biden's cognitive decline came to light, with even more defecting now. In addition to Joe Biden not presenting any signature legislation or great milestones that can be turned to and pointed to and say, I did that, I helped America with that, because nothing he did was necessarily that inspiring, he has done things that were controversial, even to the people on the left. He has enacted policies that are credited, and I'm trying to be as neutral as possible in this video, but he has enacted policies that are credited with a decline of American power, a decline of the United States' economic might, a decline of the value of the United States dollar, a decline in economics. Prices at the grocery store have gone up. Things are becoming more expensive. Things are becoming terribly expensive. The price of gas is expensive, as Americans call petrol. People can't just get in a car and go places because the fuel is prohibitively expensive, and the prohibitively expensive fuel also causes the prices to go up at the stores, since they are transported using vehicles that use that same fuel. In addition, people are worried about an illegal immigration crisis, and it seems less and less effective to simply say that one is racist if one wants better border security and enforcement of American immigration law. For years they've just said, you're racist, you don't like brown people, you don't like Mexicans. And while a few people stood up to it, others hemmed and hawed, trying to defend their position while trying to frame it that they weren't, and others simply backed away, but no more. We're beginning to see even people formally on the side of Biden, formally on the side of the Democrats, wishing tighter border security, realizing that the issue is not simply racism, but enforcing immigration laws and controlling who comes into the country. People want affordable groceries. People want affordable fuel. People want affordable consumer goods. People want to be able to live comfortable lives. They want to be able to work hard and earn money and keep more of it. They want lower taxes. They want security. They want an end of warfares, which seem to be constant throughout the world with American involvement. And Biden has gotten us involved in more military conflicts than Trump did. Trump actually ended several. And even the most infamous and heinous things people blame Trump on, such as separating children of illegal aliens from their parents and locking them in cages, was actually something his predecessor Barack Obama did and that he ended. So even though to some degree some on the left are still repeating certain things about Trump's racism and how he locked immigrants in cages and separated children from families and locked them in cages, or repeating comments about how racist Donald Trump is and how he hates black people and how he's hurting people and how he's a white Christian nationalist and the white Christian nationalists support him and it's going to be a theocracy like Iran and Saudi Arabia under Christian Sharia law, real life Handmaid's Tale. We know that's not true. We've had him as president for 4 years before and none of that happened. And even with the Supreme Court granting him immunity, that doesn't mean that he is full immunity to do whatever he wants, as if should he become president again, he can walk down the streets of Washington, D.C., a handgun in both hands, shooting random people and get away with it because the president is above the law. As they put it, a king above the law. Because Americans hate monarchy, Americans hate kings, and they assume that the difference between a president and a king is that kings are above the law. This isn't really true. Kings are often bound by the laws, but Americans like demonizing monarchy. The truth is, the immunity that the Supreme Court granted the presidency was not an immunity that allows them to do anything they want. It is only immunity within the official powers of the presidency of the United States to facilitate the ability to execute that office, because you shouldn't be able to be prosecuted for doing your duties, even if people disagree with the exact way they were performed. Donald Trump's private actions, or things that are not part of a president's powers, duties, and responsibilities, would not be covered under immunity. But the media drumbeat that it was. They drumbeated that Donald Trump was a new Adolf Hitler. They drumbeated that he was an authoritarian, a dictator, a tyrant in the making who would end democracy. And an assassin's bullet came. And Trump survived. And now the Biden campaign had to face the fact that it had no great legislative or executive victories to point to show people and lionize the base to their support. It had plenty of people criticizing it for the exuberant prices and hyperinflation that we are beginning to see on the U.S. dollar and on the foreign policy that has weakened America's position in the world, with threats to Taiwan, threats further encroaching into Ukraine, threats in the Middle East, and a weakening U.S. economic system. And we even see the Biden administration harming the very minorities the Democrats claim to cater to, taking their housing, removing certain benefits, giving them to illegal immigrants, or forcing them to stay on work programs that keep them in poverty. Programs that Trump ended, replacing them with work programs that actually improve their lives. So on top of not having any great victories to point to during his presidency, but having plenty of failures and controversies, as well as moral controversies, such as his daughter's diary being found and the infamous talk of showers with her father, even up till she was significantly older, with talks of his connections to various nefarious actors at the World Economic Forum, with all that combined with his cognitive decline, his obvious deterioration, and Trump not only having a 4-year record to stand on, which people can point to various successes, but also promising even greater things, promising lower prices, promising an end to inflation, promising lower gas prices, promising to end a lot of military conflicts that are unnecessary, promising to restore America's place as a power. And combined with the fact that Biden already looks enfeebled, and looks even more enfeebled next to a hero, Trump, who survived an assassin's bullet, not even cowering, but standing defiantly against it, saying, "Fight, fight, fight," with an American flag behind him, blood dripping from his face. That image now becoming one of the most iconic in American history, they say. That image cementing Trump as a leader who will stand and fight, and he will fight for you. As I said, this isn't a political channel. I'm not saying all of this to endorse Donald Trump. If you don't want to vote for Trump, you don't have to. You don't have to like him. You don't even have to agree with the perspective of Trump I just mentioned. I'm not telling you my views on Trump. I'm telling you the views of the American people as gauged as best I can from the various media sources that I have seen. Media sources that even when they're the mainstream media and generally support the Democrats, have themselves turned on Joe Biden. Many called for him to step down. Many put out that it was time for him to step down, time for him to retire. And he did. And this perfect storm all but guarantees Donald Trump will become President of the United States, barring another assassination attempt that does not fail, barring some grievous health issue, barring some natural disaster that mitigates against it, barring some great war with a bomb being dropped upon him, for crying out loud, and barring some unforeseen scandal, discovery of a past misdeed, or some massive failure on his part that would mitigate against all that we have seen. But in 3 months, that is incredibly unlikely. Donald Trump will ride the bullet that grazed his ear straight to the White House. And Joe Biden knew it. And dropping out of the race is billed, touted, presented as the only hope the Democrats have of winning. But Kamala Harris hasn't even been campaigning. She was never that popular to begin with. And again, she is actually less popular than Biden. The only reason she has an edge over Biden is people would rather vote for her over Biden, because even though she is less popular than Biden is, she doesn't seem to be suffering cognitive decline. But with only 3 months to mount an independent campaign to tell us what Kamala Harris stands for, people are still just going to see her as the second fiddle to the Joe Biden administration. She is not an independent person standing on her own. And this is, of course, no fault of her own. This is simply the circumstance that she finds herself in. But it is nevertheless the circumstance. While Kamala Harris may have been able to mount a credible political campaign, perhaps even a successful political campaign, had she been the one to start it right away, inheriting one so close to an election, inheriting someone else's campaign who just stepped down. Only 3 months to the election. It makes it very unlikely that her campaign will be successful. She is simply Joe Biden's vice president who is replacing him because of cognitive decline. She is stepping into a void of failure with no accomplishments to show. She cannot take on the victories of Joe Biden. Even had Joe Biden had victories to assume, her stepping in would simply be not stolen glory, but certainly inherited glory, not her own. And she has to inherit the glory of someone else, because she hasn't had time to develop her own glory, her own strategy, her own promise, her own goal. She can't run an election on promises of the future, while at the same time trying to introduce us to the concept of President Kamala Harris. She must stand on her own 2 feet and can't. She must get help from Joe Biden's legacy. And when you need to turn to someone else's legacy, even if it is a good legacy, even if it has tremendous victories, they are still someone else's victories, and the best you can say is, I was there with him, and I will do the same. It is rather like choosing St. Peter over Jesus Christ. It's one thing, of course, since Jesus ascended after his crucifixion. But this would be rather like choosing Peter had Jesus simply died on the cross and not resurrected. A failure. And now, the man who served as the right hand of the failure. I am not, of course, trying to compare Joe Biden to our Lord Jesus Christ. I'm simply using it as an analogy of the situation. The simple reality is, Joe Biden was not a phenomenally great president. He was not even a good president. At very best, he was mediocre, middle of the road. And again, he has many people criticizing his policies, even within his own party, even on the left. And Kamala Harris must build her entire campaign upon her connection to someone who is at best mediocre with many controversies and failures, cannot develop her own independent campaign. And is doomed, I fear, to running an ineffectual campaign. Of course, the nature of politics makes even ineffectual campaigns effectual should they win the election. And while technically something can be ineffective, it can still work, because there's more than one part. Again, the Trump administration may drop the ball and somehow lose all of the momentum they've gained. That is unlikely, but it could happen. But at the same time, even if that doesn't happen, maybe Kamala Harris will do something to amaze us and astound us. But as I said, it's a perfect storm. The media itself wants an ally of Joe Biden, has itself turned on him. And worse still, the media constantly drumbeat that Donald Trump was a new Adolf Hitler. Donald Trump was a dictator in the waiting. Donald Trump, the authoritarian, will strip us of our freedoms and our rights. Donald Trump must be stopped, even if it takes a bullet. And then a bullet came, and the media distanced itself from such rhetoric. And Joe Biden himself came up and said that America has no place for political violence. The media is now saying we should tone down violent rhetoric on both sides. Funny how only one side lately has been giving violent rhetoric. And it wasn't the right. But on the one hand, the media is no longer supporting you. It is in fact defying you. And on the other hand, the most powerful and potent tool the media gave you, constant condemnation of Donald Trump, criticism of his every action, reminding you he was a convicted felon, constant drumbeating on his immorality and his evils, and how he must be stopped, and how he was an existential threat to democracy, all silenced. The assassin's bullet failed to kill Donald Trump, but it did kill the sharpest criticisms against him. For those voices calling for violence and hatred can now no longer speak for fear of shame. So, we are now stuck with a media no longer willing to criticize Donald Trump. A media, though, that had criticized Donald Trump and is now hotly being criticized itself for its former criticisms because they promoted hate, and that hatred led to the near assassination of Trump. No firm record to stand on to show great victories, plenty of things to criticize, and above all, cognitive decline. In the face of running against someone people now see as a defiant hero standing up against odds to fight for them. That is the perfect storm that was going to end the chances of Joe Biden entering the presidency. And they believe their only hope now is to have Joe Biden step down and Kamala Harris take over, and I really don't see how that is going to improve things. Certainly, certain voters in the Democrat Party will now be reassured because the candidate no longer has cognitive decline. But they don't trust Harris either. Why should they? They know little about her and what she would do if she is president. And she has precious little time to tell them. It looks like the election has been won by Donald Trump. But, even though many are saying this, keep in mind what it says in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs 27:1 to be exact. Boast not thyself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. I'm not saying Donald Trump won't be president. I'm not saying he will be president. I am saying that, as it stands now, people believe he will win the election easily, and that the Democrat Party has no hope. Perhaps it was wisest and best for Joe Biden to step down. He does not have to face a crushing political blow, a defeat from a once-fallen enemy he had himself defeated. An election cycle which would see a reversal of what happened in 2016 when Donald Trump was the incumbent president and Joe Biden ran against him and secured victory, becoming president of the United States, ousting Donald Trump. It would have been the other way around. It would have been Donald Trump triumphantly returning to the office of president, a return of the king, as it were. Not in the sense the media means as a king above the law, but the true and proper leader, as it were. Or at least that would be the sentiment. For even those who accept that Donald Trump lost the election, even those among his supporters who accept that Donald Trump lost the election, don't think he should have. So he is the returning king, and the once and future president. And here he is. And Biden would look like a weak failure being defeated by a rising hero. In fact, it would even help Trump's image, for you see, Trump would be the hero on the hero's journey who was brought low, but refusing to give in, returned and overthrew the tyrannical dictator who was oppressing the people. In the narrative sense, I'm not actually calling Biden a tyrannical dictator who oppressed people. I'm referring to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. But the reason Joseph Campbell's hero's journey exists is to describe the psychological power of stories. People don't understand the monomyth. People don't really know what it was about. A lot of people now like to think of it as some ancient storytelling technique, and Christmythers would even say the story of Jesus is based on the monomyth. In reality, the monomyth is based on the story of Jesus, at least in part, as well as the story of Moses and several other figures from history and mythology. Joseph Campbell did not discover an ancient storytelling technique that had already existed and was well known. Rather, he synthesized a collection of world myths, and myth here is being used in the academic sense. It does not mean a story that is not true. It means a story which transcends its historical reality, taking on a meaning that is deeper and more significant than the mere historical facts. Meaning that the myth could be something that actually happened historically, that nevertheless embodies higher principles and abstract ideas, to give them life and form that can be more readily accessed and understood within our human psyche. A good example of that, and since we are talking about the American elections, seems apropos, would be the American Revolution, which was in fact a historical real event. But at the same time, the American Revolution is a myth. For the story of the American Revolution, as we tell it, is not simply to present the bare facts. We present a story
of a tyrannical king oppressing his people with exuberant high taxes and no freedoms, no rights, and no say. And heroes rising up saying, "No more," defying a king, rising up in the name of the people, fighting him to overthrow him, and installing not a new and just king, but better, for no king is just. All kings are tyrants, and we Americans bow to no kings. A republic under the Constitution. All thanks to a ragtag band of rebels fighting with nothing but hope against all odds against the mightiest empire in the world. Rebels with no resources, overturning power, since those people fought merely for a king, but we fought for our liberty and our lives, and we have pledged our lives and our fortunes and our sacred honor upon this great and glorious cause. The American Revolution embodies the spirit of America, the principles outlined in the United States Constitution, and what it means to be an American. Now, granted, much of what we say of the American Revolution is not true. For example, while it is true that America's founding fathers declared that King George III was a tyrant, most famously in the Declaration of Independence, King George III was not actually a tyrant. And a lot of the situation is more complicated and more nuanced when you learn about it. For example, the colonial taxes were not particularly high and were actually being raised to provide colonial defense and to pay off a war debt that the colonists had fought. Another cause of the American Revolution was the king refused to let them move west of the Appalachians to take Indian lands, which doesn't sound like tyranny when you think about it, or allowing the French to retain their Catholicism. These were the tyrannies. They're not, of course, worded that way, and we certainly don't remember them at all. But right now we're talking about the myth of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, gods among men, fighting for our liberty, when in reality, that story defines what it means to be an American, and it has a deep resonance, not only in America, but the world. It is the basis of several other stories, like Star Wars, with its plucky rebels fighting an evil empire. In reality, America's founding fathers were wealthy, and many of them had more money than the king himself. But that doesn't matter, does it? What actually matters to us is the image of the rebel with no resources, the underdog fighting and overthrowing the mightiest empire on earth. And that's what we're going to get with Trump. More and more people are taking his side, since everyone knows that for the last 9 years the media have been demonizing him. No one is particularly shocked that an assassination attempt happened, even though such an attempt has not been made for decades. No one doubts that the media played a part in shaping the animosity toward Donald Trump. And as much as it's backpedaling now, saying that we should not use violent rhetoric in political discussions, both sides need to bring peace, we should not talk so awfully about President Trump, even though they are now toning down the rhetoric altogether. People still remember that rhetoric and blame them. They have lost credibility and now look weak and cowed because they're largely seen as complicit in the events that transpired, and they lost because Trump lived. And I'm not saying the people in the media wanted Trump to actually die, but certainly some did, and some at least said they did, even openly. And now they themselves are admitting that that sort of speech can breed hatred and political violence, and that there's no place for it in American discourse. That alone is a great victory for Donald Trump. And the very fact that I am not even the one who coined the once and future president statement. Others did, even though it sounds like something I would coin. Even though he is now being hailed as this, he is going to be King Arthur. He is going to have suffered the great wound, gone to Avalon to heal, but now is back when Britain needs him most. Although Britain is now America, and Trump did not suffer an actual fatal wound. He was simply lost an election. Although now he has suffered a wound because of the gunshots, but there you go. He will come off as the archetype from Jungian psychology. He will come off as something out of the monomyth and the hero's journey. He will come off as that powerful of a character, a return of the king. And that is what the monomyth actually meant. The monomyth was not an actual mythology or an actual pattern used by mythmakers to make myths. It was a synthesis, taking several stories that are powerful and resonate with human psychology. And Campbell then worked out a formulae, not one that was followed perfectly in each myth, but one that synthesizes an average for the myths and tells the power of it. And now Donald Trump fits that mold. Not perfectly, but he fits it. Even his loss in the last election in 2020. Even that now sees him as the hero brought to his lowest point, only to refuse to give up and rise again. And what will be harder to defeat than Donald Trump the man will be Donald Trump the myth, who resonates with these psychological, potent symbols that speak to our subconscious. And I think I will do another video on this topic because it does interest me. But in closing, I do think Joe Biden made the right decision to step down. Not because I hate him, but I'm trying to think in a neutral term. He is getting older. He is suffering mental decline. His cognitive abilities just aren't consistently there anymore. And while I don't think it's necessarily as bad as some people say, or even I say when I joke, but I have a jokey personality. It may not always come off, but I do. But he should enjoy his retirement, and it is best for the country. Whether his motives are good and noble and pure, showing selflessness and leadership, or selfish and narcissistic, not wishing to face defeat and being forced to do it based upon others, or some, again, mix of both, because Joe Biden, being human, neither has to be purely noble nor purely villainous. But I do think it is time for him to step down. I also think it is indeed a perfect storm. I simply don't see an electoral victory being possible for the Biden ticket, even though now it should be called the Harris ticket. But it really is still just the Biden ticket. She is running on Biden's platform, Biden's promises, Biden's campaign money, and Biden's record. And again, this is not entirely her fault. She had no time to build her own campaign, or her own image, or to make her own promises. But now she must use someone else's legacy, a legacy that itself is tarnished, a legacy that itself is not impressive, and a legacy that is ultimately still not her own. She was simply there as supporting staff for the star of the show, a secondary character in the drama. And yet here she is. She cannot build her own name. She must stand on Biden's. She cannot build her own platform. She must stand on Biden's. She cannot even build her own persona as an elected official. She must stand on Biden's. Because even though she is an elected official, she's been vice president for a long time. She's been the second in command under Joe Biden. And had Joe Biden had 2 terms and had to step down, she would have had more time to prepare if she wished to become president. Had he left and her not run for president, but ran for president a few years later, she would have had more time. But she doesn't. And to that extent, I feel sorry for Kamala Harris. Because this is a daunting task for her. And in a sense, if you look at it from her perspective, you could make her into some great hero. But I fear a tragic one, if you look at it from her perspective. For she is doomed to failure, yet feels that she must fight anyway. But America isn't seeing it from her perspective, is it? America is seeing it from Trump's perspective. The hero who survived a bullet, the man who will fight for America, a president in cognitive decline who has caused inflation, who has caused America's foreign policy to become a joke around the world, who has compromised America's borders. A man who has gotten America involved in useless and pointless conflicts, and who has weakened America's manufacturing and trade around the world. A man who has weakened America, and a man who has brought moral perversion in by being openly active in promotion of things like drag shows for children. The moral decline has gone too far. We have hit too far down the canyon wall. We're not at rock bottom yet, but do we really need to go to rock bottom before we turn around? Many say we do, but I don't know. He's far more supportive of abortion than Trump, although Trump is supportive of some abortion rights, it seems. And I hate using the term abortion rights, but that is the term the Democrats use. Well, they used to use it. I think they now use women's reproductive care and women's reproductive rights. But I simply don't see a way forward for the Democrat Party. Again, though, I'm not endorsing them. I'm not even lamenting that I think they will lose. Nor am I endorsing Donald Trump. I'm simply speaking on the issue of the day as it presents itself to me. And I intend to speak on it again because I like doing 3 videos on the same topic to get different perspectives. Usually the later ones are better than the first. But for now, I shall close this video. Thank you, God bless, and goodbye.